I had a 7:30 a.m. photo shoot out on the lawn here at the Labyrinth, in front of flowers all over the place, with a wonderful photographer who normally shoots rock stars and bathing beauties. And I told him when I first saw him, and I said, well, I'll be a nice change today. So what he was taking a picture of me for, or many pictures, was that I am very involved in a national campaign called Deconstructing Stigma. And it's sponsored by McLean Hospital, which is in Belmont here. And it's like, if you've never heard of it, it's probably the #1 psychiatric hospital in the country. And it has been considered in the top 5 for many, many years. It's affiliated with Harvard Medical School. Backtracking 52 years, and girls, no one here knows this story. I am coming out right now with this story, and I'm ready to. 52 years ago, my parents and I moved from Toronto, where I went to a wonderful Church of England boarding school. By the way, I did a memory book for them 2 years ago too, so that's how I knew how to do it. But to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I went from a Church of England boarding school to Fort Lauderdale High School. That was fine. I made friends there. It was lots of fun. It was great. But I was maybe about 10 pounds overweight. My mother and I went to the doctor to get a new doctor in our new town, and he suggested some diet pills that I thought, wow, that's great, it'll be easier. So, and it was only like 10 pounds, it wasn't any big deal. So it was a medication called Tenuate, which I knew nothing about, and it's actually banned in this country about 20 years later. And it's a pseudoamphetamine, and I'm allergic for all intents and purposes to anything like that speeds you up, because I'm speedy enough, right? And within a month I had a psychotic break and was sent to Jackson Memorial. I was at Jackson Memorial, pretty crazy. They were trying different medications on me, and things were not working well for me. And then finally I did get better, went back home. It was not a good place. My parents were just adjusting to my father's retirement after, long career. And it was just not working. So I went back in the hospital. One day I was seeing my psychiatrist, and he said, Brenda, your parents are up in Boston right now. They're looking at McLean Hospital. There is a high school on the campus. You can be there and get better. He said, there isn't much more that I can do for you right now, but if you ever think of something, contact me and tell me what I could have done. He was a wonderful man. He went on to help many, many Vietnam veterans in a different hospital. Okay, so my parents liked it, so I went up to McLean. I spent my senior year at Arlington School, which is on the McLean campus, as I said. I'm not in touch with any of those fellow classmates there, but I did like some of them. Now, I'm just going to tell you quickly about my history class, because there was me and four boys and I, and a nice, gentle lady teacher. The guy who sat next to me, he had, what he did all the time in the class, every day, was draw lines. You know how you draw a line, 4 lines, and then he wanted to reach a certain number of lines, and every time he'd get to a certain point, he would say, I just did 100,000 lines. The kid over here was a gorgeous 16-year-old guy who had been there a long time. He was sweet. He was, I think, schizophrenic. He said that anyway. And he would look at the tracks on his arms. He'd been a heroin addict. And this was long before there was any opiate problems, long before. And my favorite was the kid who sat behind me. And he liked me as a friend. He was a couple years younger, but he would get violent. But he had the courtesy to know and announce that he needed a couple of orderlies, and so he'd say so, and they'd send him over, and then he'd get violent. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
Now, James Taylor graduated from the same high school, and so did one sister and one brother. The diagnosis they gave me at McLean, and I can remember till today, 40 people sitting at this long conference table, nurses, doctors, social workers. It was adolescent turmoil with depressive overtones. Well, there's a book out by Alex Beam, who was a Boston Globe reporter, called Gracefully Insane, and he has a whole thing about this diagnosis. And they were giving it to every adolescent because there were so many teenagers coming in there that for whatever reasons, because the drug thing wasn't quite big yet, that they needed something to temporarily give them as a diagnosis. And that was adolescent turmoil. I never got a diploma when I graduated. I never got to wear a cap and gown. So about 15 years ago, I wrote to Arlington School and said, could I please have a diploma? And within three weeks, I had a lovely leather-bound diploma, which I put away, of course. And I was thrilled about that, sort of. It was just another, landmark thing. And so then I didn't know where I was going to go. Oh, I got out after 6 months, but I still went to the high school. And they had me live with what they called a foster family. Well, you have to know that broke my parents' hearts to hear that term. But these were lovely people, old-time New England, very frugal, not anything like my parents, lovely people anyway. And I enjoyed living with them, and it was fine. And I didn't want to board at Garland because I'd gone to boarding school for 4 years. And I wanted to have a car, so I was a day student. So, but to backtrack a little, I didn't know where I wanted to go, but there was a lovely guidance counselor there at Arlington, and she suggested Garland. So the only people at Garland that knew that I was coming from a psychiatric hospital were Dean Holmes, Miss Kiley, and Mr. V.O. And the first event where both parents were invited, I got a note from Mr. V.O. in his famous handwriting. He said, please tell your parents I want to meet with them at 2 o'clock. Nothing to worry about. Okay?
Yeah.
And they came out with both of them with tears in their eyes because he was telling them how well I was doing and how well I was adjusting there. And then we all had to meet the next year, I guess. We all had to meet with Miss Kiley before we went to Bermuda individually. And she told me that I was more mature than almost all the girls there. And that really kind of made me feel good too. Now, the reason I kept this a secret for 52 years from almost everyone ever, anywhere, except for maybe a couple of friends here, maybe, and a couple of friends in Florida and Michigan, is because of the stigma. And this project that I was in a photo shoot for this morning, they've chosen 50 participants. And they're not all former McLean patients. They're people from all over who have been treated and have had successful lives despite having this. And the idea is to take the stigma away, take the fear away. And it was my fear that kept me from telling people, because I know if I hear about somebody who's had that kind of history, I'm going to back off a little bit because of fear or not knowing what to expect of that person. I am highly med compliant. I take lithium. It works for me. My sister has the same condition. Lithium works for her. And I was later diagnosed as bipolar, which I really like the old term manic depressive because it's more descriptive to me anyway. And so I live with that, and it's been very cathartic for me to be able to come out with this and know that my face and bio are gonna be plastered someplace bigger than life size. And at 71, hey, you know, I can let loose of this secret. And it was unbelievable before, when we were back in the other room. Maybe somebody will tell their deepest secret. Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. So, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right, good for you.
Were there many day students at Garland?
Yeah.
There were?
Yes, many.
I was a day student.
Oh, really? You were a day
Day
student?
student.
I
was 1 year a day.
I think there were something like 75.
Really?
I mean, it was a high number.
Yeah,
it was a high number.
Yeah. Jody Curtin, Ginny Barry.
Yeah.
I was the first year.
Carolyn Dearborn.
Mary Ellen Philpott.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.